aliens could have airplanes, like on the one side of this, right? On the other side,
to blend in. To be honest,
yeah, it would be a great one to blend in.
They might be airplanes.
Butterscotch
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 498 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Matt, I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's Friday, December 13th. 22 by 4. Before we get started, there's going to be profanity in this show. Okay. Well, we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep the podcast going. I was going to say, it's Friday the 13th. There's some spooky stuff going on.
But it's also like kind of in the holiday spirit. Is this holiday spooky spirits? Is this like being visited by the spirit of the past, Christmas past, whatever? Is good.
Krampus shit.
Or some
Well,
Krampus.
yeah,
That'd be good.
It is kind of interesting that one of the classic Christmas stories is about ghosts.
That's because the ghosts are so good. You know, ghosts are just great.
Well,
and make a good story, put a ghost in it.
Nightmare Before Christmas, you know. That's
true.
I think the best holiday is the combination of Halloween and Christmas.
That's true.
Like tying those two vibes together, like cozy winter skeletons, you know.
Yep.
It's just
Yeah.
the perfect vibe.
Mm-hmm.
December is all about scaring rich people, as it turns out. You know,
As it turns out.
not gonna say much about that, other than that
Stuff that's happened.
Yeah, and the other spooky stuff that we're not gonna go too much into because we're just like, this is weird, but I just want to put a pin in it and be like, this is happening. Is this weird shit going on over New Jersey where there's like weird things flying around in the sky that's been going on for a few weeks now. Nobody knows what the fuck it is, and they keep like flying around the nuclear power plant, and everybody's taking videos. And there was like a meeting of 500 mayors trying to figure out what it was. The White House had a press event where they're like, "We don't know what it is, but don't worry about it." So that's
Weird.
just gonna put a pin in that. That's happening right now.
So somebody's flying drones around.
Yeah.
I mean, this wasn't like if you see those huge like light shows people are doing now with drones, you know, where they can get like a few thousand drones and have them be in sync in the fucking sky, right?
Yep.
For like an extended period of time while they do some amazing choreographed dance routine thing. Or you see those people who like fly their drones where they're like wearing a headset.
VR goggles.
Yeah, like VR. So like they're watching it go and they're like doing flips and shit. And then you see like drones that can just like follow a person and video them, you know? Like we're in that little moment right now where there's like a lot of very incredible technology happening in that space with just no preparation for the outcomes of like what
the thing is,
what that leads to.
People are assuming these things are drones because that's the
what
most
else,
logical leap that you could make. But nobody knows what the fuck, like where they're coming from. They've had like helicopters trying to chase them down and figure out if they can like see them or whatever. It's like there's just nobody knows what the fuck.
Yeah, the U.S. confirmed that they're not ours, but they also said that they don't appear to be from a malicious state actor also.
Yeah, not ours. Is not the government.
They're not the U.S. militaries, but also that does mean like they might, because like the military is separate from like the CIA and other stuff like that, right? It's like, so sometimes they'll use this clever language, you know, they're like, it's not the military, we don't know, right?
Yep.
But they, you know,
it's
some other government agency or whatever.
So who knows?
Or it's just hobbyists trolling people.
Or some private enterprise. You know,
quite the hobbyist feat, though.
We have private enterprises that have trillions of dollars of assets behind them, you know. So like,
oh yeah, you can make a drone army.
You could make a drone army. Almost anybody
I could make a drone army. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's funny to see how it has ignited the UFO community who are just in a frenzy about it. And anytime I see a video, I'm like, that's a plane. Like, because people are just now like on such high alert where they're like, oh my God,
anything in the sky.
Look, there's lights. And I'm like, it has a fucking flashing red light on the bottom, like a landing light of a plane. And it clearly has like a wings and shit. You know, like, all right, let's, you know, save the enthusiasm for things that are truly unidentifiable. That's what the U stands for, you know, in UAP.
It's hard to tell, you know, it's those blurry videos.
I think I think it's the problem of like, it is still unidentified because you don't know what his deal is, you know, like, and aliens could have airplanes. Like on the one side of this, right? On the other
Way
side,
to blend in, to be honest.
yeah, it would be a great one. But on the other side,
They might be airplanes.
unidentified, no matter in what shape, doesn't mean aliens. That's not like that.
Yeah,
That's
which
not.
means you don't know.
It just means you don't know, and you can and have to, in fact, stop there, and just say,
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. And you can speculate all you want, but to go from I don't know
Remember
to
like the size of like an SUV or something, like they're big.
Some of them, they seem to be pretty big.
That's so
but
weird.
again, it's like, yeah, nobody knows what the fuck it is. But yeah, like Adam's saying,
makes
there's a big leap to saying we don't know what it is to say we know what it is and it's fucking aliens, right? Like that you can't bridge that gap because
You can't have both
you don't
those at the
have
same
any
time.
evidence. Like not knowing something is not evidence for knowing something. Right? So I mean, I'm a big UFO nut. But I think I like to take it to the point where you're like, wow, that's crazy. Look at that crazy thing that you don't know what the fuck it is. That's interesting.
You could even take it
You're
to
comfortable leaving it there. Basically.
you could take it to wouldn't it be cool if it was aliens, right? And you can also
and
take
it
it
would
to
be.
yeah, and you can also take
would
it
be
to
pretty
what
cool.
if it was? What would that mean, right?
Yeah, and you can kind of explore that hypothetical space,
Yeah.
but you got to keep it hypothetical.
Yeah, you got to
because, again,
understand
it's
that you
like-
made a leap that wasn't justified by the evidence.
Right.
Yeah, because it might just be. I mean, it might just be the mole people that live underground, that have lived underground for millions of years, and they're finally emerging.
Right. Quit looking
And
up. Look down.
Yeah, don't look up.
Yeah, or octopi. We're always talking
Yeah,
about
it could
how
be
if
the
octopi
octopus
didn't
civilization.
die so early because they only lived to be like 2 or 3 years old, and then they'd
Maybe
take
maybe
over,
they live. Maybe a small tribe of octopi started living to be 5, and now
they
suddenly
take
they've
over.
developed a space program.
Yep.
We don't know.
Who knows?
And it happens to be right by New Jersey. So
It's just how the world works sometimes. It's so crazy.
yeah, so I'm interested to see whether and how that story resolves, or if it's just like suddenly those things just stopped happening, and then everybody's like, "Well, that was weird," and then we all just move.
Yeah, it is a curiosity for sure. Both the
think
scale
it's-
of it and the duration of it. Right.
It's like a
Yeah.
horror movie, I think, where you want to know what the monster is, but there's never been a time ever in any horror movie ever where they finally revealed and it wasn't disappointing.
That's true.
So I like the idea of like this happening and then stopping and then we never get to know because
I think it's just an entertainment.
Which is how
value.
UFO things typically go.
exactly, which is how they usually work, and that leads to then all the annoying like therefore alien stuff, right? But instead of just being like we got to have a fun story this way, that didn't end annoyingly where it was like it was just this guy doing it because he wanted to troll people. Like that's one of the possible and then least fun possible explanations, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
This kind of shit happens all the time. Like if anybody hasn't heard of the Phoenix Lights, go check out some stuff about that. Where it was like there's weird lights, just like
50s or something.
It was in the
40s.
70s?
no, it was
recent.
the 90s.
Was it 90s?
Was that
Yeah,
recent? I thought it was a long time ago.
Yeah. It wasn't too long ago, and it's just like it just happened. It's just this weird fucking set of lights thing just slowly moved over Phoenix, Arizona over several hours, and millions of people were like, "What the fuck is that?" And then that was it.
Yep.
It was just gone, and people were like, "I don't know what that was," and people still don't know what that was. And sometimes that just happens, and it's kind of fun, kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, it's that thing where
we'll
you can
see
like where you can have plausible explanations for stuff, but even when you don't have evidence for like which one it is, because the whole idea of trying to figure out what a thing is you basically look at the info you've got, identify all the possible explanations for it, and then try to find evidence that like knocks some of them out until one remains, right? That's basically how this works. But if you don't have if all you have is the evidence that gives you the initial list of like, it could have been an airplane, could have been a helicopter, could have
Now
been
you're just theory crafting, which is fun.
yeah, then and you don't get any additional because once it's in the past, well, that's it. No additional stuff is coming.
There's no more data.
Yeah, and you just get left with that. It's like, well, here's the list of things it could be, and it is interesting how the fact that it's still unknown makes people latch on to all of the stuff that it probably isn't. Also, like,
Oh yeah.
like we can have explanations that fit within the world we understand. We just don't know which one of them it is. Right. But by not knowing, it makes us want to also reach for the stuff that doesn't fit within the stuff that we know. Right. And it could be those. That is true.
Yeah, because it could be a lot of
Because we don't know.
We don't know.
Yes,
That's the whole thing about not knowing.
Yeah. It's the whole thing.
Yeah, as a human, it's hard to just not know something and be like, I guess I'll never know, and just walk away.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's happening. And that's kind of, I mean, otherwise in the studio, we're just cruising along on Crashlands 2 stuff, working on lots of story things. Sam's been animating so hard, his hand is about to fall off, I think.
Yep.
Adam's been taking care of tons of admin stuff, and we're getting like store pages built out and taking a jillion screenshots, all that stuff. So we won't go into any real detail, I think, about what we've been doing, in the game this week. Because it's reaching a point where anything we talk about just becomes spoilers, I think. Yep. So instead, I think we'll just go into listener questions. So these questions come from podcast.bscotch.net, and the highest upvoted question of today comes from Belkmaster 5000.
Belkmaster.
Yeah. Now, I don't know the other 4,999 Belkmasters, so I hope I'm not missing out on any Belkmaster lore here, but we'll try to get through this question. Belkmaster 5000 says, what do you think of the idea of a design Bible? How do you balance planning too far into the future and risk changing plans versus planning too little? I think it's probably the same as like a game design document.
Yeah.
I think could be, but also could be more abstract. You see this in a lot of like web.
more of a religious.
We also see this in a lot of like web dev stuff with the idea of a design system, which I think is kind of a similar idea, but it's basically like some kind of a reference material where you say you kind of list out the things that like what so typically for a design system, you'll say like it's like here's our color palette that we use. Here's like the names of those colors. Here's what it means to have like a gradient between like our two brand colors, like here's when we have a button, here are the rules for like
it's like brand
where
guidelines.
Things go. It's brand guidelines and design guidelines for websites. And it's a discussion that comes up constantly in the web dev space of like, how do you decide on and document what your overarching design things are? So that then people in your organization or you yourself in the future, right, can just reach for like, oh, here's what we do for buttons, How do you do that in a way that is both manageable? Because every time you have to solve a new problem, you need new design documentation, right? Mm-hmm. How do you do that in a way that's manageable, but also that gives you still the freedom to do stuff that makes sense in the specific context you're working in? Because, sure, you could have like a primary button as like a kind of button, but is it really true that everywhere you need a button, the blue button, that's your primary button, is the right thing? And it can be if things aren't that interesting,
Yeah, I would think about this more like when you're coming up with these plans. We've talked about this a lot in the past about like game design documents and how it's really useful to establish certain pillars or principles that you're sort of like using as foundational elements. I think really you just get into trouble when it comes to integration. And by that, I mean, once you have chains of assumptions that start to rely on each other in this document. So instead of it's like, oh yeah, like our buttons are going to use this blue color for their background, right? Mm-hmm. And that is probably built on the assumption that the interface in which the button lives is also a certain color.
Yeah, because it'll also be part of your design system.
And so then it's like, okay, so now you're already 2 layers deep with that, right? And then if you say, okay, text on our website has to be one of these 3 colors, or whatever. And it's like, okay, is that true of the text on this button? Because now one of those colors looks bad on the button color.
Yeah, that's why you need your button text color that varies, and your options for that one too, right? Yeah, and that's things like
so the deeper your chain of
explodes.
assumptions goes, the harder, the more bullshit you got to document. We even hit a point where this was quite a long time ago, but I think it was when we were doing like Apple sign-in and we were trying to figure out how to convey it visually, because there's lots of guidelines about how you can convey the Apple's logo and stuff like that.
And what text you're allowed to use if you're using sign-in with Apple, which it has to be that text.
And what font you're allowed to use and how you can phrase it and stuff like that. And in some cases it was, it's like, it's annoying, but it's like, okay, sure. It doesn't really, it actually makes things look worse because we're like, well, now we have to use a different font and a different design aesthetic within our app where all the other buttons use the native design aesthetic that we've used everywhere else.
But it also gets even more annoying when you have a bunch of external design constraints that all have to come together. Because like the sign-in is a perfect example of this because we have sign-in with Google. We have sign-in with Apple. If you're on our website, we have sign-in with, all of the things you could sign in with. So there's like 8 fucking entries in the drop-down, right? I'm technically violating the fuck out of all of the guidelines on our website because there's not a way for me to give you 8 buttons.
Because they're mutually exclusive.
That have mutually exclusive requirements of like what's around them, what their shape is, what the text is, blah, blah, blah. So I just came up with like a best case middle ground, and it's my own website. So like they can't stop us,
they can't like reject our website from being published on.
Yeah, but they can
reject our app.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but we've even run into stuff where like sometimes I think where you get into trouble is when those guidelines get so specific. So, for example, I think this was quite a long time ago, and this is no longer the case with Apple's logo guidelines. But at that time they even had pixel requirements of like this is how many pixels the logo needs to be. And
I think it was when Sign-In with Apple first came out because we basically implemented it as soon as we could for Level because Levelhead came out like a year after Sign-In with Apple came out. And we integrated it at that time.
Yeah. But the short of it is they rejected it because the button was like a pixel bigger or smaller than it.
I think it was padding or something. There was not enough.
Yeah,
padding.
there was some weird stuff like that. And we were trying to figure it out. And it was like, it's weird because not every phone or iPad or whatever has the same resolution. And so if you have a pixel requirement for a logo, that means the logo actually has to get bigger or smaller on the screen, depending on how many pixels the screen has, right? So hypothetically, if you say it has to be 100 pixels tall, right? If your device is a 540p, which like the old phones were, right? Then that means that the logo is it's like 20% of the size of the screen. But if you're in 4K, which is 2000, now suddenly it's like 5% of the screen, right? And so you're trying to figure out how to design your interface around this weird constraint that actually doesn't really work, right? And so sometimes like that's just an example of like when you get so in the weeds on how things have to relate to each other in your design document that it ends up just causing problems when really like the spirit of it, which I totally can get behind from Apple's perspective, is don't make our logo look like shit, please. Right?
Yeah,
like make it
well, and also make it so that users understand what's happening. Right? That's the two-parter. Right?
Yeah.
So that's
make it obvious and make it look good.
Yeah.
But then you go so far as to say, and here's exactly what it needs to look like.
Yeah.
And then
a lot of these are interesting when that's in the case of basically the brand guideline design doc sense from a large entity who's dealing at scale with other entities, right? Who it has questionable levels of control over, right? So like Adam was saying, we could do whatever we want on our website, technically. You can kind of get away with doing whatever you want on your trailer, on something like YouTube, provided you don't clip it and try to put that then onto the store where they can say you are violating something. And it's like, I think you really have to back up and ask yourself the question with a design doc of any kind. So for video games, what the point of putting the doc together is, like really what the point is. And I think there's a reason why I don't like the reference. I don't like the like brand Bible or design Bible idea because it implies such a level of immutability and truth. When in reality,
it's like a constitution that needs a
ratifying
supermajority to be amended.
And it's like,
I
really
like
what you're trying
guide.
to do. Yeah, a guide. It's a guideline where it's like the most important thing to me from like having done this with Crashlands too is largely with what we did with that large design doc basically that we put together with Milanote was almost like collecting potential pathways for these larger system ideas and then using some of those like assumptions that you drill down into to try to understand before we built anything how all of it fits together and how that reinforces what in particular.
Yeah. What are the implications of these foundational decisions?
Right. So if it's saying like, okay, we want this game to have these buddies in it, which was like the big kind of wrench in the works to figure out how that would interact with progression. We want the game to have these buddies that like you end up having to build a base for, and they're kind of like your roommates. So that way we can solve one of the major problems of the first one, which is this whole like, you can build a base, but who cares issue. And we can get a lot more of this like home-based character interaction and like that kind of coziness from that in there. So you do have to walk down the particular paths, right, with each of those to be able to answer the question, like, how do these fit, right? And some of our early ideas there, like one of them was, maybe it's the case that you give like whole buildings. It's like building a village. Like there's going to be a lot of buddies or something like that, right?
So you don't have build mode. You like
You would have build mode, but it's like you're placing whole little buildings as opposed to like brick by brick, right? Yeah, that's was kind of the idea. And that would be like, you don't go in them because like you just make one for your buddy and then they live. It's almost
that's
like
where they live.
Yeah, it's like building a town sim, right? But that's got one very big suggestion about like how many buddies there are. Apparently shitloads in that context, right?
Because you're building a whole, your system is to build a town worth of people.
Yeah.
And also, where do you live? And it's like, okay, well, nowhere apparently.
Yeah.
You know?
So, but you got to, so that's where I think the particulars, exploring the particulars is required, right? I think that's, so to me, it's like,
but
it's
I would
this weird
differentiate that from, to me, that's the design process, as in like figuring out what you're trying to do, what the implications are, how it all works together. And the same with that, like, and the same with that programming is like the process of programming is also like, we need this code that does this code that does that, how they interact with each other, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And the design part is I think design is part of what's happening through those processes, but that's a more like fundamental part, like aspect of design. There's the zoomed out part, which is you need to like be bouncing back and forth, right? So like as you're exploring and designing, you can then extract the high level. It's documentation for code is the same idea, right? Like when you're doing code documentation for say like maybe you got some sort of a cool web service and you want to expose parts of it so people can automate things or whatever. So you have like the API documentation, right? That's not the code. It doesn't represent all of what's in there, right? Mm-hmm. It's giving you this like high level view in this practical way for you to solve certain kinds of problems, abstracted from all of the details, right?
Right. Well, I think
which is what this should be.
Yeah, that kind of gets to the point, right? Which is like what problems is trying to solve for you? Because you have a couple of different ones. Like the brand guidelines thing we're talking about is the problem of like how do we make it so that people represent like our company or whatever else at scale, so they don't have to talk to us every time, or we have to be yelling at people. Where you can be like, follow these guidelines, and you just have a book you throw at them, and that works great, right? But when it gets to like the design questions thing, you basically have to move up levels of where like you have your highest level thing that you're trying to decide early as far as like immutable pillars. Where like this is what the game is trying to do, regardless of the details. It's trying to do this. It's in this genre, right? So like then you move down a little bit, and it's like as you get closer to the ground, then of course like the level of change that's going to happen as you go through the actual production process is going to go up. But the biggest thing for it, and the thing I don't see often enough in design docs, is people then using them to identify, like based on these decisions that we made, these high level things, what are the things that we need to basically do first to figure out if this is going to work? What kind of tech and other like content hurdles we're going to run into? You should be able to, if you have a good design doc, you should be able to answer all those questions just by looking at it and knowing what your team comp is. So in our case with Crashlands 2, literally we put like the first pitch I put together for the thing, which wasn't even the full doc. It was just like a fucking PowerPoint with really high level ideas. Immediately brought up this big question of like, how are we going to build this? Because building it to meet these specifications means we need certain capabilities we don't currently have. Or we need to be operating at a certain scale we're not currently at. So how are we going to do that? Can we even do that, right? If your design doc doesn't let you probe into those questions, then it's
find those.
Yeah, that's the whole.
Discover these problems.
Yeah, that's really the whole point. It's actually about risk management, if that makes sense. Where it's like you use it to be able to find the questions that you need to answer before you can really embark on the build process, like that's the serious production process.
Yeah, I think it's that. It's about providing a platform for autonomy. Because if you've got a team, you don't want people having to like remake and relitigate individual decisions like what font do we use and like kind of or what's our core color palette? What color have we been using to indicate that like, oh, this is an affirmative and this is a negative,
right,
whatever. That doesn't feel
just say
affirmative versus what's the opposite of affirmative?
Negative.
It doesn't feel right, but anyway, that's fine. So you want to be able to have people go off and say like, cool, I'm going to go work on my part of this where I have to also do 1,000 individual design choices. I don't want to look up every choice in a design doc because that's a nightmare, you know? But what we want to be able to do is be able to trust that, okay, this person like understands what we're trying to do. Everyone's in line. And they have this reference doc for certain kinds of questions that either provide the context that you need to be thinking about, or provide answers to the common kinds of things you're going to be running into as you're sitting off to do that kind of stuff.
And I do want to put a plug here for for this bike shedding idea and problem in this context. And for those who aren't familiar, bike shedding is this concept about when you're looking at like a big project or intricate project, and you're trying to get confirmation from people about buy-in basically on how it's all going to work, feedback about it. There's a very typical scenario that plays out where people argue a lot about really, really small shit. So there's the idea of like the bike shed, where it's placed, how big it is on like a whole campus, corporate campus.
Yeah, the story comes from people needing to build a nuclear power plant. And then the people involved with making all decisions about stuff got too focused on the part that mattered the least, which was the bike shed that people would leave their bikes in when they came to work there.
Yeah,
because
and not about things like the containment of nuclear waste.
Because that was a lot
like
easier to think about and make decisions about than the whole giant project of.
Yeah, and that's something we've talked a lot about, which is like how do you know when you've sort of entered that territory? And I think a good example is in the case of like this, Adam, your point, like affirmative versus negative colors, right? I think there's this great one where like the time for specificity is important. Where if you said, oh yeah, we're going to use red for negative stuff and green for confirmations. Well, there's a really, really gigantic question wrapped up in those two tiny words you use, because the question is which green, which red. I don't know if you know how many fucking colors there are. There's a lot.
There's like at least 6 or more.
Yeah,
easily.
At least 6. And so there's this sort of funny thing there where it's like you can then have everybody arguing about which particular red, right, needs to be happening.
And you can, to your point about how many colors there are, particular can get particular, right? As in two people could be arguing about like a hue shift of like 1 or whatever. Yeah.
Right. But all the while, the whole point of like having the affirmation or like negative buttons in the first place still has big unanswered questions. In other words, like just use a fucking red for now. Like literally just use a red for now. We will get around to a point.
Yeah, put the color into a variable. Yeah, so that way you can change the red whenever you need to.
Yes, because
I treat it the same way I do for code. Where like so when I'm like building a website for something, right? Then what I do is I start with my base color palette where I just pick some colors. I just need some stuff quick, and I like, but it's a vibes based, right? So it's like, okay, it's gonna be dark mode, so that's the vibe, right? And then I just pick some stuff based off of that and the aesthetic that I want, set those as variables, and then as I need more colors as I go, I just add them in that moment. I just see like what looks good right now, and then once I have to solve that problem a few times, it's related. I'm like, cool, let me pull this into a variable again, or once I want to change it, or whatever, right?
That's another way to do it, right?
And just build up over time.
But again, it's the point of like, where should you be focusing any of your energy when it comes to something like a design doc? It should, to me, it's always about being able to identify where your risks and your problems are going to be, and then having discussions very specifically about those higher level risks and how to mitigate them, those higher level problems, how to mitigate them by walking the path down, down to the earth again and seeing kind of where they show up, but not accidentally getting stuck on like just real small stuff that maybe doesn't matter right now. And I think the mistake we made with our Crashlands 2 one was basically, it was only later when, after like a bunch of implementation time gone by, when I went back to it after a lot of discussions between Seth and I, and just abstracted out those very high level facts about like how each system worked, right? The intended goals for it, implications that would come from it. And they ended up being like 2 sentences and then a couple bullet points about like, this implies system support for X, Y, Z, integration with X, Y, Z in this way. Very simple shit. But previously it was like a big pile of, it could do this.
It's just a bunch of details.
Well, it was the conflation.
You have to go down.
Yeah, it was the conflation of the design process for the design document, right?
Yes.
Which you need to, again, you're bouncing back and forth between like big picture vibes and what does it actually mean practically once we try to do things, because you know, kind of no matter what level of abstraction you're at, unless it's like real high up there, there's no big picture that also meets the reality of the details, right? So it's always a back and forth process. But if you conflate those things together to end up with, oh, here's my design document, which is the thing where you were doing the work to figure out how the design works, right?
Yes.
Then that's the same as being like, here's my code, right?
Yeah.
Use that to understand how the code works, right? It's like, it doesn't.
Yeah.
There's too many details there. We need to zoom out. But yeah, finding that right level of zoom is unanswerable. There's not a right level. You're just constantly bouncing back and forth trying to figure out what's the practical for your circumstance, for where you are in the project, for who your team is. What's sort of the practical level of abstraction to where it's worth documenting stuff. So I can, and I think all this matters the most when you're working with a team, right? Because
that's the other part of it is like, it's about scale, right? Design docs are for scale.
And they need to be more specific as scale goes up to assist with, because you want to be like, if you're Apple, right? And every year across all of Apple's ecosystem, you're going to need to generate, I don't know, 10,000 web pages, let's say, right? Made by 1,000 different people, right? They don't need to look exactly the same, but that sure as shit needs to feel like an Apple website, you know, when you go look at it. And so
It
they're
needs to
going to
be
need
blinding, just completely white.
White.
Pure blinding.
so much white space.
Yep.
Yeah.
Insurmountable levels of white space.
You open
right?
that thing up, you better not be able to see for.
Put on
at
your
least
sunglasses because we're opening an Apple
And
website.
get ready
you
to
know?
scroll. Yeah. So, but yeah, you have to be able to encode like, okay, yeah, here's the Apple vibe, big picture, but also here are at least some specifics of like what does it mean to build something that also
when that meets the road.
yeah
right?
sufficiently matches practically that we accomplish our mission of things being consistent, right? And so if you think of like Sam and Seth working together on stuff. Like Seth's doing implementation of UIs and all this kind of thing, right? And he's gonna need a color palette to work with. And either he can make those choices, or Sam, the art director, can make those choices, or they can each make choices and then, you know,
Smoosh them together at some point.
smoosh them together. at
Or a
some
lot of
point,
what we do
right?
nowadays is all because of what we've done with our tech stack. Sam is actually a lot more familiar with popping open Game Maker and doing stuff in it.
Yep.
So a lot of times I'll just make an interface and then I'll just make a little task for Sam and I'll be like, here's where you can go in this script or whatever to change the colors.
Yeah, do
To
whatever.
make yourself
You can
happy
set
and
them
keep me at it.
so you could just if you don't like what I did, here's the lines that you tweak to make it do what you want to do.
Yeah, and I think that the core idea there is the way that you avoid bike shedding there is you don't have people involved. You have one person whose job is to decide. Right. And I think that's something we learned over time is to, as much as possible, just be like, yeah, I do have opinions about this. You know, there's not a color palette I've ever met where I didn't have opinions about it because I'm a person.
Opinions about everything.
We got opinions about stuff. But I have to decide when does it matter that I have opinions about it. Right. And figuring out who, so basically like what I try to do is I say like Sam basically decides when it comes to art, color, that kind of stuff. If I have a really strong opinion about something for like a practical reason, like it's literally hard to see for me from the way my brain works, right? Or, well, that's almost the only reason, right? If there's, or if like I'm looking, I'm like, this doesn't do it for me based on like I have a different set of objectives, I think, and this is solving a different problem. Like that's the kind of stuff where I'm like, okay, cool. Then I will still come to Sam and make an argument, right? But everything else, even if it isn't what I would prefer, I'm just like, got shit to do though. So
Yeah.
someone's got to decide.
You got to, and like if you have a team where you can't do that really for those core things, then like you don't have what you need.
Yeah, it's more important for things to happen than for them to happen perfectly.
Yeah.
You
Perfectly
know,
according to
they gotta
your
happen.
own perfect, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Well, that's part of it too, right? Is because even though, because there are color palettes and stuff, or like other kinds of, or say like UI, UX decisions and stuff that Sam and Seth, because they're the ones working on that stuff, and then I go look at it later, right? Mm-hmm. I have opinions about like, I'm like, oh, I wish this was this way or whatever, right? But it's also true though, that they're both smart people who are good at their jobs, right? So the fact that it is the way that it is, and I have a difference of opinion about that, doesn't mean that the thing needs to change, right? And trying to, I think
it's oftentimes useful for us to hear that difference of opinion, right?
Yeah,
To be
and why, right?
Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah,
then
so-
usually
so-
the answer is like, yeah, we thought about that, but we can't because of X.
yeah, for
or
some
because
reason, right? Yeah, exactly.
These other
And
downstream.
so trying to, and so playing that game with that balance of trying to figure out like, where do you contribute versus where do you just like have autonomy and let somebody just decide and all that kind of stuff. That's basically what the game is of working with a team, is trying to
It's tricky.
move autonomy to the right place and trying to get, but also you don't want people just to make decisions in a vacuum either, because people need feedback. It's useful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the constant game that we're always playing.
zooming in and out constantly
all the time.
as appropriate. And,
Yep.
Yeah. So don't get too married to your design Bible. Don't think of it as rigid. It's nice to explore details with the purpose of exploring the implications of things, but don't treat those as fixed, you know, and try not to get too lost in the weeds.
Well, yeah,
It's
and anytime
pretty
you're doing
good
that-
summary of all of that.
Yeah, anytime you're doing it, just always ask the question, what am I trying to do with this document? Like, what is its purpose, right? And who is it for? Given those two things, does this document actually accomplish its purpose with those people, right? And if you do that every time you sit down and try to like write some documentation about something, then you're gonna end up at a decent level of Zoom level.
And
right?
I will say, if your idea of a design doc is simply like enumeration of all of the like features, if that's like what your goal is, then you ought, like that doesn't really, it still doesn't do anything for you, because you can say you're done at any point when you finish a bullet and there's nothing to check against. right? Like you rate 3 features and you're like, I'm done.
Well, just make sure that the last bullet is the game is fun and good. Then
right.
you know.
Yeah, it's like, again, it should always be oriented around like, does this allow me to answer questions about where the risks are going to be, how we can mitigate them, how production can work, etc. Once you have all this,
Yeah. All right. Next question comes from Lexzap, who says, after the recent news on Netflix and Crashlands 2, I want to get your take on the subscription-cation of all media, and particularly on games. Do you still prefer to purchase games as they come out, or do you use Game Pass, Nvidia Now, Apple Arcade, etc.? What is the value proposition for consumers versus game devs? Now, this is something we have talked a lot about internally because it's weird. I think where I'm at on this is I've actually unsubscribed from most like game specific things.
Yeah, I also have.
But I mean like subscription services that feature lots of games, and kind of not hypocritically, but maybe ironically, I do subscribe to World of Warcraft. Yeah, so I do play a game that has a subscription, but I don't subscribe to a service that gives me lots of games. And one of the big challenges is that it's very different from something like I'm on Kindle Unlimited. You know, I pay $10 a month or whatever it is, and then there's all these books that I can just read whenever, right? When I get a book through that, I don't need to learn how to read again every time. I can just start reading that book and I'm good to go, right? I am a Netflix subscriber, and so when a new show comes out, I know how to watch a show. I just boot that fucker up, hit play, and just start vibing. I'm just enjoying myself, right?
The startup
video
cost
games
is zero for like all other kinds of media, but for video games, it's very high.
Video games are not like that. Every game you boot up, you have to learn how to play it.
It's part of the fun, right?
Yeah. And like the more games you've played, the more you can kind of bootstrap your knowledge of how games work, right? But it's still the case that, that first hour or two, especially of a new game, is very often work. Like it's hard work to you're taxing your brain trying to figure out how the rules and how to win and like what is the point of this game, and did I pick the wrong difficulty? Did I pick the wrong character? What you don't know anything. And because of that, games are pretty sticky, right? Like people tend to find a game that they like. They like to master that game and then keep moving along that mastery curve and keep playing that one game for a long time.
Because they've got a high switching cost between.
Yeah, there's a high switching cost. And so in a subscription service where the value is we have a lot of different games, that's actually not the same kind of a benefit as it is for having a lot of different shows or a lot of different books.
The basic point being because you don't play a different game every night. Versus like Netflix, you could watch a different show every night. You know what I mean? You watch 5 different shows in one day. I mean, but you wouldn't do that with a video game necessarily, right? They tend to be more batched, unless you're talking about like really these very small scale experiences. So something like a Candy Crush or whatever else, where it's sort of like it just sort of slips in amongst
something you learn basically instantly. And
and so that's kind of what you're seeing then is like a lot of these subscription services are kind of trending more towards these more I'll use casual games just in terms of like casual meaning low learning cost, right? Yes. Like a game that you can pop in, figure it out within like a minute or two, and then you just kind of go.
And also low context loss, right? Because it also means between 2 sessions. So basically, it's games you can have lots of sessions over time with and like come back to after a while and get right into it, like when kicked out. Because like you imagine like if you boot up like Fallout or something, and the last time you played it was 3 months ago, you're starting fresh, right? Because trying to piece back together where you were is just so hard. But if you can pick it up and just be like instantly grok where you were at and then keep going, right? Then it's less likely that you get kicked out and that you just keep playing instead.
Yeah, and this kind of creates this paradox because those types of games that are more casual games, they're very easy to pick up and play and run with. They're also the easiest types of games to make.
Yes.
Which means if you're subscribing to a service and its whole thing is like, look, we've got like 100 or 200 or 300 different like chill ass casual games. But if you're not subscribed to that service, there's millions of those games that you can just get for free already on the different app stores and stuff like that. And so I think for games, the subscription model is it's a bit of a mess right now. It's kind of
I would say it makes a lot of sense in like through certain lenses. And I think so. If you think about Game Pass, so I've been on. I think I've been subscribed to Game Pass for like maybe 2 years, something now, 2-3 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm the sort of person who I don't play like a game for a very long time. I typically like the max I typically play any given game is like 20 hours. But except for like once a year, there's something. So it was Elden Ring 2 years ago, it was Baldur's Gate last year, where it's like there's something I play for like 140 hours, right? So it's like a few, like 2 months, 3 months of my like spare time goes into it. But otherwise, I'm very much a snacker because like for whatever my own thing is, like I love that upstart learning thing. And once I can see the full shape of the design, I basically get bored and need to go somewhere else. Like it's sort of.
But it's also really useful.
I get
for
it
your
now.
job,
Moving on.
Right? As a game designer, is to see lots of design, get to the point where like, okay, I get the design, right? And then because it's part of your interest and why you play games that way is because
exactly.
Yeah.
And so like that's always been the case for me, actually. You know, when we played WoW growing up with Seth, and like I could never stick to a character to the end because
we called it. Sam had alt fever. He would just make alternate characters. He'd get up to like level 20 or something, and then he'd be playing a warrior. You know, he'd be like hitting stuff, and then he'd see a mage shoot a frostbolt, and he's like, "Oh, that's amazing! I want to do that." And he's a mage.
At the time, I thought it was because I was like, lacked some discipline from sticking to something. But I think actually what it is just like I get it. Once I get it, I'm not really super interested in continuing to.
I think it's. I think there's. We talk about the explore exploit dynamic, right?
Yes.
And I think I'm much more on the exploit side.
Yeah, I'm very heavy on the explore.
And Sam is very on the explore, which is like he just wants to experience new things. And I want to go as deep into a thing as possible, basically.
Right. And so, like, when it comes to a subscription model for me, for like a Game Pass has been great because I just, if I said, it's not necessarily the case that I know exactly what I want to play. I'd just be like, oh, I literally just want to go play games in a similar way that I want to go watch a show. And I would sit down. If there's something good or like that looks like it'd be fun, then I'll pick it up. Sometimes then I'll stick with it for a week, maybe something like that. And then that's kind of it. So it's worked. And the thing is, like, I think I'm a more extreme example of that, but I think that kind of more, it's a more almost, I wouldn't call it a more casual approach because I play them frequently, but it's a
non-committal approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the weird thing is there's this kind of push pull, right? Which is like, you didn't play Elden Ring through a subscription service, right? You bought it.
Correct. Yeah.
So the thing about that is like, if a game really hooks you in and you do play that game for 100 hours or 200 hours or whatever, and that's spread out over several months, it's not very common for you to also go play other games while you're deep in it because again, there's this switching cost where like you don't want to abandon your current like knowledge set of your current game because if you stepped away from Elden Ring for 3 weeks and came back, you'd be like, wait, what the fuck is going on here? 100%. And then you start over, right? So you tend to stick, like once you do get stuck in a game, you tend to stick with it for a while. And if that game happens to not be in something that you're subscribed to, like it happens to not be, then now you're just spending money on the subscription service. And it's actually like hard for you to go over there and play games because you're in the midst of a different one.
Well, I do think though there's an interesting thing in this. Something we've literally talked directly to platforms about, like just an interesting core problem with the way that like payouts work in a subscription context, which is basically that all the subscription services are looking for is engagement, like on a month-to-month basis.
Because they want to keep people subscribed.
Yeah, payments are done on a free-to-play model.
Correct.
Yeah, which is so weird that, for example, like Monument Valley was a big thing in Apple Arcade, which is so weird.
Now it's a big thing on Netflix. The third one.
Yeah, and it's so weird because it takes 45 minutes.
Yep.
Right. And you can get it outside of those services and stuff like that.
But we should say that Monument Valley 3 for Netflix is there's a whole article on gamesindustry.biz about how to do that, they're basically moving towards a live service model where they're going to be putting out content really frequently and all this kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all about keeping people subscribed. So sorry, Sam.
Well, yeah, but I think what's so weird to me about that is like a responsibility thing, right? So the platforms, these mega entities, infinite money. Their goal is to keep people in the subscription, right? When it comes to then like how they pass the responsibility on to devs, what's so weird to me about it is that they task us specifically in our game, getting someone to come back every day for like 180 days or something, right? As opposed
which they don't do with shows, for example.
Exactly.
So they wouldn't say like, "Oh, you made a movie. Well, we're not gonna put it onto our service unless you can convince us with metrics that people will rewatch this movie every month."
Yes.
And so, but they do that with games.
They do with games. So, and again, it's not just like Netflix. It's how all of them work. And so even like Game Pass, you know, you got these, there's like a performance tiers, right? It's like the top games every month in terms of how many people are playing them or whatever, like engagement, quote unquote, get these bonuses, right? And again, like that, it makes a certain kind of sense. But what's weird about it is that like the goal of the portfolio, which is managed by this giant entity with a chill of cash, is to keep people around, right?
That's why you subscribe to the service.
Yeah. When it comes to any individual game, it's so weird to me that like basically the engagement metrics that anybody cares about is just like D30, D60 retention, right? Super long form retention, even on something like Game Pass. And what's weird to me about that is the fact that like oftentimes a lot of times the most notable games, you'll just play the shit out of it for like, I don't know, sometimes it's just a weekend or like a few weeks or something like that, but not in a way that would like cross your billing cycle. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I think I put 30 hours into Balatro over like 3 weeks, and then I haven't touched it since.
Exactly. Right. So it's
incredible game. I would recommend it to anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
But its day 30 retention for me was 0. Like I didn't play it after the first month because I got what I needed out of it.
Yeah. And so I think what's interesting about that then is saying that the portfolio's model for success, right? The metrics of portfolio cares about, which is basically, are people engaging with stuff in here every day? Passing that exact same metric into all of the individual things. It's similar to saying if Netflix said something like, oh yeah, people need to watch this show again next month also, and the month after, right? It's like, it just doesn't quite make any sense.
I think maybe coming from the other direction here, which is, I think if you think of the people managing these subscription services as all the problems you're describing are the problems they have with their other media that they're trying to sell, right?
Yes.
Which is,
you have to keep
if they don't have something big and new, or if they don't have the stuff you search for, right? Because basically, if you're Netflix, say, right, then you need to maintain a really expensive portfolio of fuckloads of TV shows and movies, so that when I, as a subscriber, go like, "Ooh, I want to go watch X movie," I can go search for it and find it. Which, as we all know, is increasingly not true on any platform, right? Because it's been fragmented.
Yeah.
So as that happens, then so the risk that needs to be true, or there needs to be frequent content that is exclusive to them that they get to basically say, you know, your Stranger Things, you know, whatever. Be like, oh yeah, if you stay subscribed, you're going to get all this like fucking dope stuff that everyone's talking about when it comes out. It's really good, etc. Right? Also extremely expensive. But on that side, very risky because it's not stuff that already exists. Who knows if it's going to be popular or not? Also,
in the context of film media or books, it's a one and done thing typically for most consumers, right? It's like
it's one and done, exactly. So the model that all these companies have for their non-interactive media, right, is that they're making one and done content and have an extremely expensive, increasingly expensive, and high risk mechanism for maintaining subscriptions. So I think they see games as, ooh, this is our cheat code where there are individual games like Fortnite, right? Candy Crush, that people literally have spent billions of dollars on. And there are people playing today who are also playing 10 years ago, right? Or these games that people can just play, or World of Warcraft, that people will just pay forever. Mm-hmm. Sorry, play forever, but also pay for forever, right? And so I think that all these subscription services are basically saying like, ooh, if we can end up with some of these in our portfolio, then we don't have to worry so much about like, shit, did we have a new movie out? Shit, did we get this thing that people are searching for? They're trying to find as many means as they can to ensure that there's always something there for you that you're going to regret not having.
Right. And in that context, I think you're 100% right. It makes sense that they would say the specific role then that a game can fulfill that none of these other forms of media can is in that potential for essentially hobbyism, right? Repeat play of the same thing.
The mistake, though, is making it so that becomes part of the demand, because a game that is like that is shaped in a particular way. It's free to play shaped, right? It removes it. So I think you could think of like the lower budget, like reality TV show stuff, which is extremely popular and also sell subscriptions, right? You could, as you can say, again, on Netflix, every year there's like 5 more new kinds of reality TV shows, right? Because they can keep on making that kind of content. Mm-hmm. But if that's all that was there and they didn't have Stranger Things, right? Or they didn't have Stranger Things, like that gives you a different kind of audience that is much smaller. It's the people who are into reality TV shows, right? Yeah. And I think the problem that because they're trying to use games as this like silver bullet of engagement, then they're basically gambling to try to find the one game that does this. Right? But they want to do it now.
I would say
10 times for a diverse audience, right? And they're like, oh, that's the silver bullet. But all they're doing by forcing things to be free to play like is they're limiting the audience palette to.
I would actually argue that this is it sounds correct in terms of like we want to get games that have this potential for long form engagement, which means sort of like the live service game model is the one to use, the free to play game, the casual game, whatever. The weird thing is, like, if I look at my Steam library, the games that I have the most play time in are single player RPGs. Or things so like it's like Kerbal Space Program, Baldur's Gate, like Dragon Age Origins, just
but they're all games you stopped playing, right? At some point. Yeah. Which so if you're in a subscription model, then once you stop playing, at some point you're like, well, I'm not playing any of these anymore.
This is the push pull, right? Which is like I have like 700 hours in Baldur's Gate 3, which like I still haven't really stopped playing it. I still boot it up maybe like once a week at this point, right? And just kind of fuck around or whatever. And it doesn't have any kind of like live service types of things. It's just a story-based RPG. But on the flip side, if you look at, I've been playing WoW for 20 years as a subscriber, but a big part of the reason for that is that Blizzard has this incredible upside for maintaining the game and constantly adding new content, which is they get subscription money directly from the players.
Yes.
Yep. Right.
Yeah. This is where it gets.
And this is the rub, right? So like if you want to make a game like that has people playing it for 20 years and you put it into someone else's subscription service where they dictate how much money you get per player. Because
what the metrics are that decide.
Then the upside for you gets kneecapped by probably 99%, right? Like, and so you would have to have all of the burden and work and design work of making one of these long form live service style games, but with zero of the upside. So you can't do it. So instead you end up with like we're talking about, mostly either like games that are no longer being maintained. So it's, like your Grand Theft Auto 4 or whatever, right? That like those kinds of games. Sometimes you'll get like a new exclusive that I think like a multiplayer type of a game is like one that's maybe kind of an exception to it. But even those will lose their player base over time if they don't get constant updates. And if they're in a subscription service, the likelihood of constant updates goes down because the developer can't capture the upside as much of having that many players playing the game because there's a middleman now, right? And then the final one is just the casual games that are like cheap to make, easy to learn, and you can play it for a few weeks and then you bounce to the next casual game. But again, like that's where it starts to be hard to justify paying for a subscription for access to those types of games because they're everywhere, right?
So I think that the tricky bit then in terms of like where this all sits, I think to me, it's like the model has a very good place in the industry. I think we've already seen that where it's like, again, there's a lot of ways to use it to your benefit. I think there's a lot of ways that devs can benefit. So because a lot of this is assuming that like you could just make the game you want to make, even if it is like let's say it's like a subscription based, there would be a free to play game where you would make X amount of money had you had that success not through one of the subscription services. Most oftentimes now, the subscription services are giving you a big chunk of cash, right, to get on there in the first place. So like
it's an exclusive, right? Yeah. Like it's in the same way that like, if you were making a game and then Nintendo was like, we want this to be a Switch exclusive, right? They would pay you a bunch of money for that, right? Like in the same way that these subscription services.
Yeah. And so again, like there's supposed to be a good like marriage of skin in the game and all these things kind of in there. I think where it gets all just kind of weird is basically that there's only a few models of game, like genre of game, that really fit the niche of what the subscription model, like basically the way that it wants to pay out and the way that it wants to keep people engaged.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I think that's the misunderstanding. I think that's not actually true. It's just what the perception is. Because like Baldur's Gate got rejected from Game Pass.
Yeah, which is hilarious.
Because it doesn't look like the types of games that they think are the games that people play a lot of. And Baldur's Gate on Steam still has like 100,000 daily players.
Well, I think this is kind of what I get at. Though, just like the shape of a thing that you are pitching or even that someone's playing. If you're one of these people testing it at one of these services, you're asking a lot of questions about what it would look like for like D30 retention, D60 retention, whatever. And the reality is that most of the breakout things, they break out because they don't quite look the same way that everything else has looked just yet, right? And so you're almost inevitably going to be missing if that makes sense. When it comes to like, Game Pass being like Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, but also the breakout things are about retention. They're about having huge numbers of players and always more players coming in, right?
Yes.
Even if you're deep in the tail, like that doesn't mean you have to have like the same, like Baldur's Gate might have a huge number of players today, right? But still, the most players it had were like its various spikes when it got super popular, right? Mm-hmm. But it is still extremely popular, right? And I think that idea, like that popular and like new people are coming into it all the time, right? And I think that's the part where, like, to me, the whole like DX retention thing is just like, again, that's free to play stuff, and I think if your goal
but also it moves the burden to the wrong place. Like Sam was saying, it puts the burden on in each individual game
versus saying the burden of the portfolio management.
Yeah, it should be the portfolio
is to keep people engaged. And I think the reality
is the subscription service.
And I think the reality is
by having good content in there that people, again, it's the same as the rest of the portfolio. It's like a movie.
Good exclusive content.
Yeah, I think if you pass that, and again, I think it's an easy mistake to make, to say like our goal is this, and we can measure this. We can measure this specific thing that is our own singular goal of like everyday people engage with the service in some way. We can measure whether or not a particular product in our portfolio, whether it's a show, whether it's a game, whether the fuck is doing that for us. So we're going to use that metric, the one that we care about, on their level to do it. And it's like, I get how you would do that, but I think it's one of those things where it's mixing the model and the business model in a way that I think in the long term kind of just shoots yourself in the foot, where it's like you can't actually see the value that something like the original Monument Valley created. If you pitched the original Monument Valley to Apple Arcade, it wasn't already made, I could guarantee they wouldn't have said yes in the current environment.
Yeah, because it doesn't fit
it doesn't fit. It wouldn't make any sense if I said, hey, I need like a couple $1 million to make a 45-minute puzzle game. Absolutely.
But the thing is, if that service then had like 50 games all at that level of quality, that are
exactly
much like a movie, take like an hour and a half to 3 hours, to get through. I would take a really good look at that service.
100%.
I would probably subscribe to
that. Is where the error is to me. Is mix and matching this. Basically, your job as like Game Pass, your fucking job is to make your portfolio work. Right. My job is to make something that's really good for whoever's playing it to play, so that they want it, so that other people want it, so that it can be popular, so that there's a lot of engagement with it whenever they're playing it. Right.
Yeah.
But it's
not your job as the dev to have day 30 retention. That depends on the game.
Depends on the game. Yeah. Sometimes it is.
Just depends on the game. Right. Like it's your job. Yeah. Like you're right, Sam. It's your job to make something that people really, really want. And it's a great experience.
But the shape of that wanting can be and should be varied, because otherwise, like, there's no way. If I sit down like the good example, like sitting down to watch a TV show, depending on the day, depending on who with, do I want to watch like some like reality trash right now? Do I want to watch an action movie? Right? If all I had was just one of those options, most days I'm not going to take it because I kind of want something else that particular day. So can you meet these varied demands? Yeah,
if you were like, we only bring in shows that are horror themed because we found that those have the highest day 30. Like people will rewatch it, a month later or something like that. And it's like, okay, well now the only reason that I would subscribe is to watch this one specific type of thing that I'm not always in the mood for, actually, So it's not going to bring people in.
Yeah. So I think where we're at right now in the industry is basically, to me, it's like these services have now been around for a couple of years. All of them have been kind of shifting models a bit from I would say like the blue sky days when they first start, which is always along the same lines. It's like everybody wants the newest, greatest thing.
Well, yeah, I think everybody treated it initially like they do their other kinds of content portfolios, which is to say the value proposition is in the quality of the portfolio.
Yep.
And it's in having stuff that people want, so that when they go to look for the thing that they want, we have it. So they come to us to get it, right? That's the initial model. And what is like the normal model of a portfolio, whether you're a publisher or, Xbox or whatever, right? But it's constantly shifting towards
just
games games as a service, which I think games as a service. There's been lots of opinion pieces about this recently too around the games media. But like, I think games as a service is like, it's basically what is strangling and killing the industry across the board. It's because now every publisher, every subscription service wants every game to be a games of service. They want every game to be the only game you play.
Mm-hmm.
So they're demanding that every game be designed to be the only game you play. So now all players are interacting with games where they're like, oh, this thing clearly wants me to play it forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And games aren't allowed to end, right? But that's where all the money is going, is because everybody wants to have the next Fortnite, right? Yep. They want to have these guarantees because games is risky as fuck. That's true, right? Any entertainment media, risky as fuck. Most movies don't do very well, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's risky. And so I get it. I get why everyone's trying to do that. Of course, almost every single game as a service also fails, right?
Yeah.
But when they succeed and they get to then, because if you take like a Fortnite, like Fortnite pulls all the oxygen out of the room.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many people who would be gamers who are just Fortnite players, right? Because that's where their social circle is. That's the game that they grew up on. That's the game that they know. It's available everywhere, and it's constantly feeding them new stuff, so they never go look somewhere else.
I think what it is like again, it's kind of like with Minecraft or whatever else. It's like that's cool, and there's a place for that. But I think when you're talking about like a business model, if you're like, hey, we want to carve out space next to those things, I don't know. It's like how
can't.
How the fuck are you gonna? There's only so many live service games of that scale that like a population can support. You know what I mean? They're sort of like it's like an alpha.
It's almost like, none. It's only a tiny number.
The ecosystem can only support a few of these things at a time because they suck up so much time and attention and money.
I think to kind of summarize that point, it's like to be the next Fortnite, you have to replace Fortnite. Like you have to take all the players away from Fortnite to be the next one because they're already all playing games.
Or if
they're
you don't
busy.
take them, if you don't take them from Fortnite, you're taking them from all the other games, or whatever, right? Like there's kind of a finite attention economy that stuff can go into, right? And this push for everything to be part of a service is basically it's all a bid to capture as much of that attention as possible indefinitely, which is definitionally what a monopoly is, right? Like it's basically monopolizing all of the time, which is what all the rest of us need to have our games be successful too, right?
But I think what's so weird to me about that is like is that as a subscription portfolio, right? The portfolio itself, by being varied, can become an equivalent force, right?
Oh yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But I think what's so weird is the fact that because the more you try to make every single thing in it an equivalent force,
like a live service game,
the less likely it is that you're going to be able to actually compete. You know what I mean? Like
because live service is like multiplayer, right? Like multiplayer succeeds when it already has a population, right? It succeeds when it's successful, and multiplayer games fail with a really high frequency because they never got the numbers right. Games as a service is the same deal. If there aren't enough players to warrant the investment, the service part goes away. They're extremely expensive. So the service part goes away, and the game's designed around that, right? So then the game goes away. And we just see this over and over again, especially in the recent years, right? Of just like new game as a service comes out because that's all that everybody's doing. Every single one fails. And now we're starting to see them get like pulled from the market, which is pretty wild. Within like
because at a certain point, like the whole thing about game as a service is somebody has to deliver the service.
Yeah.
And if it becomes unsustainable, you pull the plug on the servers.
Yep.
And it's over. And then it's not even a game anymore. It's just a launcher that goes nowhere. Right.
Yeah. So I do think we're in this weird. There's a learning phase happening here. I think there were a lot of takeaways from the like opening days of subscriptions model stuff with games where companies said, these like either smaller scale experiences, things that don't have a lot of retention in the long term, whatever, they're not actually good for us. That's essentially what happened after the first like 2 years or so for everybody. Then where we're at now is everyone's like, all right, so let's go more on that. Like everything is retention based, whatever else. And what you're seeing now is that it's less good for devs, both because the combination of smaller payouts up front, plus the fact that the portfolio decides how you get paid and can change that at any time.
Opaquely.
Yeah.
They typically don't disclose.
Yeah. Means that like
the metrics.
It makes less and less sense as you are able to build a more and more retention oriented game. It basically makes less and less sense for you to do it within the subscription. So if the subscription is forcing you to do that, they're sort of forcing an evolution of a thing that will kill it. So it's just like a weird. I'm like, what do you guys do?
This is also one of the things that just always. Anytime I think about the whole like big guy, little guy aspect of this stuff, I get it seems like the 30% store cut that almost everybody has. So again, kudos to both mobile platforms, though it was under regulatory pressure for knocking that down to 15% at least for the little guys for a while,
Yep.
But the degree to which these extremely successful, extremely enormous enterprises put the burden on the people making the content that they're making the money off of, where it's like
to make their platform successful.
Yeah, so like they just take 30% of all of our money, right? We're making the thing that makes the platform successful, right? One of many. We're not making the thing, but like it's people like us making the things that make that stuff successful. And they're just like, yeah, 30% of everything you have is ours, right? And also,
I think if you flip that around, what it really means is that you would be able to take home like 45% more money.
Yeah, it's a huge, huge. And if you take that in terms of runway, that's 40% more runway, right? Of like chance to make
more time to make the next game.
So we're constantly like the risk of us as a small enterprise going out of business is constantly 30% higher or whatever than it would be, right? Because like the size of a store, it's the same deal when it comes to if all the money has moved in the industry to subscription services and they require a certain kind of business model, and that business model is extremely likely to fail for an individual game, right? So like a Crashlands 2, right? A single player RPG is not super likely to fail. It's not super likely to succeed hugely either, right? But it's not
it's not likely to succeed
fail
on the scale of Fortnite. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's exactly. Yeah, it's never
failing
been Fortnite.
is just like also not going to happen.
Yeah, but it won't just like suddenly be like, oh, you can't play this anymore because nobody's playing it. Therefore, yeah. So it's like it's got a different
time scale. It'll recoup its cost. You know what I mean? Kind of like no matter what. We survive long enough, it'll make its money back. It's fine.
And we can't pull the plug on it because it's single player.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just there. So the forces of the market are basically pushing us towards alternate business models, where those business models for us as an individual company, for them holding the portfolio, they're basically gambling the same way that like a VC does, where they're saying like, yeah, I'm going to lose money on most of these, but one of these can make Fortnite money. That's the dream, right? But they force all of us to follow the same business model. That's actually way worse for us in the long term, because in the long term, if our business model is that we have to make our games exclusive to a locked down platform in order for us to sell them at all, and we have to design them as a game as a service, right? Or some other free-to-play like model, limiting the audience in a really substantial way to a certain kind of audience, right? One who's in subscription services that have that kind of content, right? If that's the only way we can make money, then when those things fail, then we don't get paid because their particular kind of success was, predicated on like
all contextual.
What the design was.
Right. It's all
contextual. So, and we lost something from our own portfolio because it's trapped in somebody else's service, right?
Yeah. Or the design
and we lost all the players we would have had who are into the kind of thing that we're making rather than the kind of thing we had to make, right? And we didn't scale up in the things that we actually wanted to do. So we've lost the potential skills that we could have had. And the net effect is that the likelihood that we get to survive as a company goes way down. The likelihood that we get to make the stuff that we want to make goes way down, right? And that all is a permanent change that happens every time we try to make something fit with whatever the market realities are, right? Which is how markets work. That's also just true, right? But when it comes to entertainment media, I find it extremely frustrating when
you increasingly have people who are not taking meaningful risks at all in terms of like what it means for them to fail. So in the case of like Apple,
well, they're putting so much risk on us is the part. Yes. It's the big guy putting all the risk on the little guy. It just makes me fucking crazy.
And again, I'm not. So again, it's not saying that you as a person building something for one of these platforms or building something on Steam are like, I don't know, should get paid just because you made something. It's not what I'm saying, right? But
you should
what I'm
pay
saying
because
is
you
that
can
like
sell it.
Yeah, you should pay because you can sell it or because it's good. And increasingly, there's enough detachment from this that as you also then revisit the fact that like the overall starting payout for something like Game Pass has gone down tremendously in the last couple of years, or Apple Arcade stuff, right? Then it's like it just makes less and less sense. And so I think that where it kind of goes from here, where it seems to be going, is just into the space of like only certain fits of games being in these services, which I think in the long term, like will make it less and less likely that more people are sticking to them and subscribing to them. Weirdly
I think you'll see the same thing you see on like the mobile stores in general, right? Which is the moment mobile started to incentivize free to play as a platform, right? Then every single game became shaped that way, right? And now mobile as a gaming category is like treated derogatorily by people who are into games, right? Mm-hmm. Not universally, but mostly. And we're going to see the same thing for subscription service where when the sub-services first started, all of them, I was actually extremely pumped because I was like, fuck yeah, this is a way to mitigate risk for interesting games.
I've been excited about each one.
Yeah, each time.
Clear.
Yeah, fucking pumped. And when they first came out, like their portfolio strategy matched what I wanted them to be, which was like, oh yeah, well, we're going to find
just got a
really
bunch of
cool
good
stuff.
games in there.
Yeah. So now if you're into games as a category, then there's just interesting good stuff for you to go experience here. In a way that meant that I would potentially try more stuff because the risk of like the initial purchase, the risk of like
Exactly.
shit, I actually don't like it, whatever, all that's gone, right? So
great.
I was
That's the power of the model to me, right?
yeah, exactly. Very excited about that. But as it shifts away from that model, then we're moving to the free to play model, which is like, yeah, now all the games are shaped the same, and they're shaped around their monetization system.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying there is that it's not that those games are bad. I'm just saying that like by their nature, they don't share very well with other games, and they are only a particular kind of experience. And so if
each one's trying to take all of your time.
Yeah.
Well, and again, any of those games would be better served not being in the subscription service if that's the type of game that it is.
Yeah,
for them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well,
if you have a game that can get,
right? It's trading downside, or like it's trading what the floor is for what the ceiling is, right? So like if you're trying to prevent your floor from being zero, then yeah, upfront money, that kind of stuff.
Right. But the difference is
Amazing,
like
right?
if you're talking like mobile or even Xbox stuff, like the difference for a premium game, right, or an indie game between having like a higher floor and a capped ceiling. That's a great trade typically, right, for a premium title, because like the ceiling cannot be that fucking high. But we're talking about like the difference between a
game as a service.
Game as a service, and what that cap, like putting a cap on that for what it's releasing, like that's actually a tremendous risk in the case of like
because the floor is always zero.
Floor is always zero.
So it's a complicated landscape right now. I think we're all in the same position that like the idea behind these subscription services is good. The trajectory that most of them seem to be taking is not that. It's probably not that good.
A little less exciting.
And hopefully some of them kind of rebound and get a better understanding of like what it is
pendulum
that they're
swings,
doing.
whatever.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll.
And if not, then then maybe that'll just be the end of it, and we'll just go back to buying games like normal.
But it's just constant reshaping of the industry, So at any given year in the industry, it's been more or less annoying, like what the business reality looks like.
Yeah.
And I think right now we're kind of at peak annoying across the board, which isn't just about subscriptions. It's just about kind of, as you can see, like
Battle passes.
everyone's been fired. Every company's been eaten by another company and dismembered,
Steam's still taking 30%.
Steam's still taking 30%.
Yeah.
Increasingly, I feel like we're just over here in our corner. Like, you guys know that meme from Community where what's his name comes into the room and he's got pizza and everything's just on fire, Increasingly it feels like we're that guy where like we're just doing our thing,
just trying to make
games.
games.
We're just making our games, and then every time we kind of like peek in the room, it's like, oh my god, what is going on here? So we'll just keep doing that, and we'll still be here.
Yep.
So I think that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa Acosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll send you an email when the game launches, which we still don't have the date announced, but soon we will. And otherwise, having those wish lists helps to boost the game on Steam charts and helps to get it exposure. And so we'd appreciate that. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.